Now I will tell you what medieval historians are hiding. Winter in the Middle Ages spared no one, but peasants knew how to keep warm where it seemed impossible. Their solutions were not spectacular, but they were thought out to the smallest detail and tested by hundreds of cold nights. There were no unnecessary details in these houses. Every corner, piece of fabric, and board worked to preserve heat. Let's take a look at the simple techniques that made the cold bearable and brought back the feeling of home even in the bitter cold. Watch the video to the end and you will learn how low-rise log cabins and stone huts created warmth that lasted longer than the fire in the hearth. What if I told you that everything you believed about poor and freezing medieval dwellings is not true? Let's start with how the house itself became a blanket and why this solution still works today. Peasants hid heat in the thickness of the walls, in the height of the thresholds, and in a multi-layered shell of clay and lime. They seemed to sew the house like warm clothes, combining different materials into one reliable layer. And it was thanks to this clothing that the internal temperature remained more stable than one might think. The first thing that catches the eye is the low ceilings and modest size of the room. The less air there is to heat, the easier it is to retain heat, especially with a low fire. The ceiling was made of logs and boards, sealed layers were laid on top, and the gaps were filled in so that air could not escape. Visually, everything looked simple, but every millimeter of mortar served a purpose. This is how heat was saved without requiring extra fuel. The entrance was designed as an airlock to prevent the cold from rushing inside in one burst. A high threshold blocked the draft, and a curtain at the door served as a movable barrier. Sometimes a small vestibule was arranged where the air had time to cool down on the way, and the inner room remained protected. Such a passage disciplined habits. No one slammed the door unnecessarily, and the house responded to the care by retaining the accumulated heat. The walls worked like batteries, and this is not a loud metaphor. A thick layer of adobe absorbed the daytime heat from the hearth and released it slowly, even after the fire had died down. Clay loved uniformity. The calmer the hearth burned, the milder the nighttime microclimate. The lime plaster added dryness and stability, cutting off moisture. The result was a simple system: accumulate during the day, release at night. The floor was not left cold, as is sometimes imagined about the past. Under the embankment lay dry layers of plant material that acted as insulation. Plank flooring raised the foot above the damp ground and insulated against excess moisture. In some houses, the floor in the recreation area was made denser and warmer to prevent drafts from below. This made walking less energy-intensive for the body. Textiles in the house were not decorations but tools. Thick curtains were hung not only on the windows, but also along the walls, reducing the feeling of cold radiation. The fabric softened the air and absorbed the drafts that arose in the cracks. In the evening, the curtains were lowered and fixed in place, turning the room into a compact cabin. In the morning, they were raised to let out excess moisture. The bed is a separate story of thermal economy. High lofts raised the sleeper above the cool currents near the floor. Heavy curtains around the bed formed a miniature room within a room, where breath and body quickly created a comfortable zone. Quilted bedspreads did not so much provide warmth themselves as retain the heat generated by the person. A simple rule worked flawlessly. Less volume meant more comfort. The corners of the house were distributed according to temperature, and all the household members knew this. Warm areas were located closer to the interior walls and the source of fire, while cold areas were located near the entrance and windows. Household chores were moved to the cool sector so as not to disturb the carefully created comfort. Rest areas were kept away from direct drafts. This is how the household maintained the thermal map of the house. Windows were not made large, and there was a reason for this. A small glazing area reduced heat loss, and the shutters were closed as tightly as possible. In the evening, gaps were covered with fabric to prevent drafts. In winter, glass inserts were less common, but the frames and sashes were carefully sealed. There was less light, but more warmth. All these techniques seem obvious until you encounter real frost. Then you realize how important it is to coordinate the details. The threshold, curtains, layer of clay, and height of the bedwork as a single whole. A house is measured not in square feet, but in degrees saved. The calmer the system, the less fuel is wasted. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Which of these techniques would you use in your own home? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more historical discoveries ahead, which I will talk about in other videos. Are you ready to learn the truth about houses without chimneys, where smoke is not the enemy, but a helper? In old dwellings where there were no iron dampers or ceramic chimneys, the fire was not driven upward, but left to live inside. At first glance, a black hearth seems crude. The flame burns directly on the clay, the smoke goes up to the ceiling, smokes the beams, and leaves marks. But this is precisely where its wisdom lies. Warm air rises slowly, lingers under the vault, and prevents the cold from descending. The smoke moving towards the exit warms everything it encounters. It gives off some of its heat to the wood, clay, and even the air. It leaves almost cold. Thanks to this, the house is heated evenly, and the walls act as a heat reserve rather than protection from fire. Such a hearth was not a mistake of primitiveness. It was a well-thought-out tool, built according to the logic of life, where everything is connected. Soot on the ceiling is not dirt, but a mark of warmth. It seals micro cracks and makes the roof tighter. Over time, the ceiling becomes almost smooth like leather, and the house stops drafting. The darker the vault, the better it retains heat. Soot acts as a membrane that absorbs heat and releases it slowly when the fire dies down. A void was always left above the hearth, a space where heat could be retained. The ceiling was made multi-layered, first thin poles, then a layer of grass or moss, then turf. The thicker this layer, the longer the heat stays under the roof. In this dome, the air cools slowly, and winter ceases to be an enemy. Even when the flames die down, a soft breath comes from the upper layers. This breath is the real heating. Smoke behaved not as an enemy, but as a worker. It dried the walls, drove out moisture, and disinfected everything it could reach. Damp dwellings aged faster, while dry ones lasted for decades. Smoke killed mold, drove away insects, and impregnated the beams, protecting them from rot. When the walls were saturated with soot, they began to repel moisture. Therefore, in old houses, the air remained warm and dry, even after rain. People knew that if the hearth was smoking, it meant that the house was alive. The fire was not lit immediately or everywhere. First, a warm base was prepared, a clay platform leveled by hand. Around it was a frame of stones or flat clods of earth. The stones retained the heat and gave it off longer than the coal itself. The flames were laid out gradually, dry branches, thin twigs, then thick logs. Each layer had its own time. A quick flash warmed the air, slow smoldering warmed the walls. Fuel was chosen not by sight, but by sound. A dry branch rings, a wet one hisses. Branches gathered in the wind burned softly without throwing sparks. Dense wood was used at the end of the fire to smolder while people slept. The secret was not to overheat the house. A fire that was too hot drove the heat uselessly upward, leaving the bottom cold. Therefore, the Romans, Slavs, and northern hunters were united by one rule: better a long smolder than a short flame. The poker and shovel were extensions of the hand. They were used to distribute the heat as if controlling the breath. Thick coals were pushed to the center, thin ones were moved to the edge, creating invisible air currents. This way, the fire did not die out suddenly, but went out slowly, leaving behind an even trail of heat. A clay coating mixed with ash was applied around the hearth. This mixture not only sealed the edge, but also reflected some of the heat back. The clay and ash did not crack, crumble, or allow air to enter from below. The hearth was stable and repaired itself. New micro cracks were filled with ash, and the surface became stronger after each cycle. Hooks or crossbars for hanging pots hung over the fire. They also served as heat diffusers. Iron or wood, when heated, gradually released energy. Sometimes a grate was placed above the hearth to dry clothes or herbs. Everything worked in unison. Smoke dries, heat feeds, air moves. The smoke vents were more important than the hearth itself. They were made under the roof on the leeward side. In the morning, they were opened wider to expel cold air and smoke residues. By evening, they were covered to keep the house warm. Some houses had two such openings, one for kindling, the other for sleeping. It was a simple but ingenious ventilation system, controlled by hand rather than by a mechanism. The black hearth taught discipline. You couldn't slam the door. It would disrupt the airflow in the house. You couldn't throw wood on the fire unnecessarily. The smoke would come back. Every gesture was carefully thought out. Even trips to the fuel supply were kept short so as not to let the precious heat escape. This gave rise to a culture of precision, where movement was as valuable as fire. When guests arrived, the host immediately sensed the air. Where the soft warmth lingered, a bench was placed. The back caught the heat from the walls, the face from the fire. In such houses, the conversation was quieter than outside. The smoke under the ceiling muffled the sound, and the air seemed to soften the words. After the meal, the coals were not extinguished. They were spread out and left to breathe. At night, the hearth became the quiet heart of the house. A thick crust of coals was left on top, a cover under which life did not fade away. Inside, everything smoldered slowly until dawn. In the morning, it was enough to stir the ashes slightly, and the flame returned. No matches, no fuss. The heat was preserved as if the house itself remembered the previous day. Why could such a hearth heat large volumes with modest consumption? The secret is simple. The heat was not released until it had done its work. Each layer, earth, clay, soot, air, was part of a single cycle. The heat passed from the fire to the wall, from the wall to the air, and from the air back to the body. Not a single degree was wasted. This is how people lived for centuries, without chimneys, without excess, but with a precise understanding of heat. Fire was not divided into dirty and clean. It was respected as long as it respected humans. Now here's a question for you. What step allowed people to move from black smoke to a clear flame without losing this living balance? In the next chapter, we'll look at how this experience gave rise to the closed-breath stove, the first step towards a home where man and heat became one organism. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The most stable heat in the house did not come from a bright flame, but from a quiet, heavy mass saturated with heat. The massive stove did not glow. It breathed. Its work resembled the breathing of the earth, slow, steady, calm. Stone, clay, and brick absorbed heat gradually, layer by layer, until they began to radiate it themselves, without fire. This heat did not burn or flare up. It flowed like warm air under the skin. The house was warmed not by flame, but by the memory of it. The massive stove worked slowly but surely, like a large vessel filled with sunshine. It was not lit, it was awakened. First, a light fire to wake it up, then a moderate flame that allowed the heat to penetrate deep into the masonry. Each brick, each layer of clay absorbed this heat, stored it, and passed it on. When the flame died down, the stove itself became a source of soft light and steady warmth. Thus, the whole house received not a flash, but a long echo, not a flame, but a pulse. The secret of uniformity lay in patience. The stove was not heated for the sake of spectacle or for the sake of red flames, but for the sake of internal heat that cannot be seen, but can be felt with the hand. The stove required attention. Too fast a flame would only heat the walls and release the heat outside. Slow heat penetrated deeper, to the very foundation. Then the heat was retained for days, even in frost. The warm surface did not burn the palm. It accepted it like fabric. The air around the stove became dry and light. The house became calm, and breathing evened out by itself. The bench next to the stove was an extension of its heart. Here it did not burn, but enveloped. They lay closer to the wall, where the accumulated heat was preserved. In the morning, this place remained slightly warm, as if the night still lived there. Old people, children, and sick people rested there, and even bread was placed there to rise. The soft, even heat made the night predictable. No temperature swings, no sudden cold spells. The house kept the rhythm of the people, and the people kept the rhythm of the house. The wall behind the stove acted like a second stove. It absorbed the heat and slowly released it into the opposite corner. This corner became the coziest place. There were benches, bundles of dry herbs, and baskets of fabric. In the evening, people were naturally drawn there. It wasn't hot, but it was stable. People knew that if the wall was warm, the house was healthy. If it had cooled down, it meant that the fire had been impatient. In the evening, the heat was slowly removed. The fire was not extinguished, but put to sleep. The air vent was covered, and the coals were pulled closer to the center. The flames died down like the sun. The air in the house thickened and became quieter. The curtains were lowered in advance so as not to let out the accumulated heat. Every little thing, a closed crack, a smooth rag, turned into a degree of warmth. At night, the stove did not sleep. The stones inside held the heat, like a heart holds blood. The warmth slowly flowed into the air, making sleep smooth and deep. Even if it was freezing outside, inside, your breath did not steam, a sign of true balance. People got up in the middle of the night, adjusted the damper, and listened to the stove breathe. The sound was muffled and steady, like an animal's breath. That meant everything was fine. Warmth begins with what is closest to the body. Clothes were worn in layers so that the air between the fabrics would act as a silent buffer. A thin layer trapped moisture, a middle layer kept its shape, and an outer layer protected against drafts. This way, the body tired less and lost strength more slowly. In the home, this rule was continued with bedding and curtains. The bed was not a luxury, but a tool. The mat was spread out so that it stayed dry from night to night. On top were quilted layers that trapped air and prevented heat from escaping. The feet were insulated more tightly because the cold came from below. In the morning, the layers were aired out briefly and carefully. The curtains on the beds did their job in any weather. They cut people off from the cold air in the room. Inside, there was a small warm niche where breathing quickly evened out the climate. It became easier and calmer to sleep. The morning was met without chills. The window curtains changed the house in the evening and in the morning. At night, they were lowered to the floor so that cold air would not flow down the wall. During the day, they were raised so that excess moisture could escape. Thus, the fabric breathed along with the house, and the house was grateful for that. Woven rugs on the floor served as warm islands. They were placed in areas where feet most often touched the ground. People moved across them while going about their business near the hearth. Their feet became less tired, and their bodies lost less heat. Small things became a salvation. Dryness equaled warmth. Things and fabrics were not kept wet for long. They were moved closer to the warm wall rather than to the fire itself. This way, they dried gently and without sudden changes in temperature. They lasted longer and did not give back the cold. Layers of clothing were adjusted to the task at hand. For quick jobs at the entrance, an extra layer was taken and returned to the hook. For work at the stove, the outer layer was removed to avoid overheating. This way, the body did not lose its balance. During the day, energy was conserved. At night, sleep was conserved. Chests were used to store dry fabrics for unexpected cold weather. They were not touched unnecessarily and were kept as a source of warmth. In severe frost, these supplies were changed throughout the evening. One extra blanket provided an hour of peaceful sleep. It was a clear and reliable calculation. Caring for the fabric was simple and persistent. Dust was not allowed to accumulate on thick layers. The folds were smoothed out so that the fabric would not get damp in the shade. The smell of dry fabric served as a sign of order. The house breathed easily. The textiles were not decoration, but part of the thermal structure. They covered gaps, softened corners, and kept the air where it was needed. The layers created a quiet, obedient microclimate. It was easier to work and sleep in. Thus, the fabric became a second hearth. Guess what happened next? The house learned to warm the night even when the fire had long gone out. The main solution was loft beds, which raised the sleeper above the cold floor. The air is warmer here, and the draft is weaker. Sleep became longer and deeper. The loft beds made part of the room more compact. Thick cloths were hung around the bed to reduce the volume to be heated. Breathing quickly created a warm layer. Inside, it became smooth and calm. This feeling lasted until dawn. Warmers were prepared in the evening. Stones or vessels were used to collect the remaining heat from the stove and carried to the sleeping area. They were wrapped in thick fabric and placed at the feet. The heat was gentle and long-lasting. The night ceased to be endless. The foot area was key. That was where the body cooled down most often, and that was where the effort was needed. An extra layer of fabric or a warm object solved this problem. The feet stopped freezing. The whole body relaxed more quickly. The bed was laid out as a sequence of layers. At the bottom was something that kept it dry. Above that was something that kept its shape, and on top was something that kept it warm. The layers were not mixed up or swapped around. This way, the whole set worked as a single unit. Every evening, this arrangement was repeated. The loft was also used during the day. It was convenient to work with your hands there during the coldest hours. The residual heat from the night lingered there. Things that needed to stay dry were kept nearby. The corner retained its status as a warm place. Why does a compact room within a room save more than a powerful fire before bedtime? In the next chapter, you will learn how walls and roofs themselves help the hearth, and how simple seals turn a house into a reliable shell, even when the wind is stubborn and long. A house retains heat not by the power of fire, but by the harmony of its shell. Everything in it works together: walls, roof, floor, windows, doors, even the fabric on a nail. Heat is not retained, but directed, like water along a channel. If there is a leak somewhere, the whole order collapses. Therefore, every little thing becomes part of the overall discipline. A good house is not heated by firewood, it is heated by attention. Walls are the first line of warmth. They must be dense so that air does not wander through the cracks. Any crack is a door for the cold. Coating with clay or lime smooths out irregularities and makes the wall dense, like fabric without holes. The internal corners become quieter and the temperature evens out. Where there used to be a draft, now there is stability. Walls should not be too smooth. Slight roughness traps air, and air traps heat. The roof is the thinnest boundary between the house and the sky. It likes order, dryness, and peace. Wet layers lose their strength, dry ones retain it. Nothing damp should lie under the ceiling. Wet straw steals heat, while dry straw creates an air gap. Dry air is the best insulator if left undisturbed. The wind may howl outside, but it should be quiet under the roof. When the roof is warm, the whole house breathes more evenly. Windows are the vulnerable eyes of the house. More heat escapes through them than through all the walls combined. Therefore, during the day, they are opened briefly to let in light and dispel stagnation. And in the evening, they are closed tightly. Shutters, thick curtains, even a simple piece of fabric with a hem at the bottom make a difference in temperature. Light comes in, heat stays in. In winter, windows become living devices. Condensation on the glass indicates the dryness of the air, and frost indicates cracks in the frame. The house speaks through the glass. The doorway is the heart of heat loss. Every time it is opened, the house breathes in and out. Therefore, the threshold should be high and the entrance protected. A curtain in front of the door, even a simple one, saves hours of heat overnight. The vestibule, even if small, works like a valve. It takes the wind on itself, preventing it from breaking through inside. In good houses, the door is opened quickly and without unnecessary conversation. The wind should not have time to respond. Walls are allowed to stay dry. Wet things are never hung where it is cold. They are moved to a warm wall where the heat is softer and more even. There they dry without evaporating into the room. This way, the walls remain dry and the air remains even. A dry wall warms even without a stove, while a damp wall draws heat from your hands. Therefore, caring for your walls is caring for your own strength. The ceiling is an invisible heat keeper. Everything that the walls do not retain escapes through it. Any gap under a beam takes away several hours of heat in the evening. Therefore, silence and thoroughness are needed upstairs. Once and for all, the density serves for years. If the ceiling does not breathe with a draft, the house ages slowly. For the winter, the joints are re-caulked, and a layer of tow or moss is laid down. It's a day's work, but the result lasts all winter. The floor is an invisible boundary between warmth and the earth. Without it, heat escapes downward like water into sand. Therefore, in areas where people walk, rugs, mats, boards, and skins are laid down. The flooring is kept dry and clean. Moisture cools more than cold air. A dry floor reduces leg fatigue and returns warmth to the body. Even a short rug by the bed can retain heat for an hour longer. The house responds to such care with softness. The trim around windows and doors is the last line of defense against the wind. Fabric, hemp, wooden slats, moss, anything will do if laid correctly. The air stops cutting the room into strips. Where there used to be a draft, there is now smoothness. In the evening, the air in such a house is softer and sleep comes faster. It's a small thing, but it's small things like this that build peace of mind. The most important thing is to get into the habit of checking the small things. Cracks, joints, curtains, thresholds, doorways. This is a short evening checklist that is worth more than an armful of firewood. The house loves attention and responds to it with warmth without unnecessary words. There is no romance in it, only reciprocity. Warmth stays where people are not too lazy to see the details. A house is not a fortress, but a partner. If you help it become whole, it will become warmer than it seems. And then, even in a blizzard, only the sound of the wind will remain behind the wall, not winter. The morning began not with noise, but with the movement of air. The first thing to do was to air out the room briefly. The door was open for a minute. The shutters were slightly pushed apart to let the fresh, cold air in and push out the nighttime moisture. The air was refreshed, but the accumulated heat was not released. After airing out the house, it was time to tend to the stove. A pot with yesterday's heat was revived with a few dry twigs. The clay edge of the stove was still warm, making it a convenient place to dry small items such as gloves, mittens, and towels. The morning fire was not for heating, but for breathing. It enlivened the house, restoring its rhythm. Next came water, bread, and a quick tidying up. The house transitioned from sleep to work without any sudden noises. During the day, tasks were combined into one warm cycle. Cooking, repairs, and drying were done closer to the hearth. Everything that required heat, seams on clothes, shoes, tools, food, was gathered around the stove. This way, energy was not wasted. The heat worked twice, first for things, then for people. Things came back dry, people came back calm. By evening, the walls were not overheated, and the air remained even. The house did not pay for activity with heat because the rhythm was coordinated. Door openings were reduced and planned. Each trip to the yard equaled a loss of several minutes of heat, so everything was done at once. Taking out the ashes, bringing in water, checking on the animals. After returning, the threshold was closed more out of habit than effort. The curtain fell back into place without reminders. It was not strictness, but part of the overall economy. The house retained its warmth because people did not interfere with it. Twilight was assigned to switch to quiet mode. The curtains were lowered, the paths were leveled, and the gaps in the doors were checked. Everything that moved during the day had to be put in its place by evening. The stove went out evenly and predictably. Dry pillows, furs, thick fabrics, anything that would keep the body warm, were placed in the sleeping area. Time slowed down, as if the house and its inhabitants were preparing for sleep. The evening meal coincided with the gentle warmth of the walls. The table was placed closer to the warm surface so that the back felt the warmth and the face felt the coolness. Conversations flowed calmly, without arguments or loud words. No one took someone else's place. Everyone knew where the room stayed warm the longest. This heat map was learned without words. People sat where the house intended them to sit. Night was a time to conserve movement. People got up rarely and quietly so as not to disturb the air. Lights were not turned on unnecessarily. The eyes got used to the dim light, and the heat remained under the ceiling. Things needed at night were kept nearby, familiar to the touch. This way, the body did not waste energy searching for them and did not cool itself down with unnecessary movement. This was the essence of winter rest, silence in which nothing is lost. Tell us in the comments which of these ideas you would try first this winter, and what topics about medieval life you are interested in learning more about. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes about simple solutions that have helped people beat the cold for centuries.